Playing video games allows the average human being to live out their wildest fantasies when it comes to professional sports. You get to rise up the ranks of leagues like the NBA, NFL, NHL, Premier League and sports all over the world, including things like bowling. That exists. But sometimes video games are also used to take us outside the world of traditional sports. I'm Sam from R-CADE Glasgow, and today I'm counting down our top 5 fictional sports. While I directly mentioned video games, that's not all we're talking about today. We're also going to be discussing board games, television shows, and film franchises. If there's anything I might have missed in our countdown of our top 5 fictional sports, let me know in the comments down below. P.S. Don't tell anyone. Part 2 of this is in the works, because there's just so many. I won't do top 10s yet. I don't want to upset the flow. Number 5. Robot boxing. You know what's really depressing? Real Steel is yet another science fiction action film that tried to predict what life would be like in 2020 and got it disastrously wrong, but I so wish they'd gotten it right. And unlike most of these films that were made in the 90s and 80s, this one was made in 2011. That takes a lot of commitment to science to expect that in 9 years' time we'll have a professional robot boxing league. Spoiler, we almost did. Much like real-world boxing, the robot boxing from Real Steel is visible at every level of society, whether it be carny fairground fights or up in the big leagues fighting on an international stage for multi-million-dollar prizes. We get to see the journey from the minor leagues to the major leagues of boxing through Hugh Jackman's character within the context of the film, while also getting to see Jackman take his robot Atom all the way to the chrome-plated prize fights. The giant robots are owned, operated and repaired by their owners, each of which receives monetary compensation in the form of endorsements or prize money from the performance that their robot puts in ring. Each robot is controlled using a handheld controller which features a button combination as well as motion control. For the protagonist robot Atom, owned by Hugh Jackman, he has slightly different functionality in that he can copy the exact movements of his controller and recreate them in ring. Think of the typical robot boxers as the Wiimote, whereas Atom is more like a Kinect. That's right, in this story the Kinect is the hero and the Wiimotes are the villains. Robot boxing doesn't exactly exist in our world in 2021, but there have been a couple of times where it almost was real. The first example that comes to mind is Robot Wars. If you're not from the UK, you might not have heard of it, but it is a staple of our culture over here. That was a sad sentence to say out loud. The popular television show features much smaller vehicles. In Real Steel they were about 8 feet tall and could walk on bipedal legs. In Robot Wars it's more like racing cars. Each of them is equipped with wheels to traverse around the arena and weapons like spikes on the outer shell, mace and chain, or even things like chainsaws in order to rip apart their opponents in ring. The goal of Robot Wars is to survive and decimate before the house robots get you. And if you've not searched Robot Wars already, wait till the end of this video and then search. While on a mainstream level, Robot Wars might be the closest we've come to recreating Real Steel, there have been slightly smaller scale operations which have come way closer to recreating the robot boxing aesthetic. In 2012, the Sci-Fi Channel financed a brand new series called the Robot Combat League. Designer Mark Satrakian built robots which could be controlled using an upper body exoskeleton. Satrakian had previously done work on films such as the Men in Black series and on Hellboy. Each different robot was controlled by a different professional athlete, all of whom came from different walks of life. While the presenter of the television series was famous professional wrestler Chris Jericho. The main reason I consider robot boxing not to exist yet in the modern day is for 2 reasons. Firstly, the Robot Combat League sadly only lasted one 9-episode season. Secondly, the robots were constrained at the lower body. They were standing on plinths that were controlled by a separate member of the team, unable to move independently of this second member. Satrakian has said in interviews that he wanted to produce a second series of this television show where the robots would have freedom of movement with their legs. Unfortunately, it looks as though that might never come to pass, as Sci-Fi hasn't made any announcements about the show since it ended in 2014. This technicality is also why this is number 5 on the list. Number 4. Blitzball. Have you ever dreamed about playing water polo inside an amphitheatre for 5 minutes? Well, with Final Fantasy X, your dreams become reality as we introduce you to Blitzball. Within the game, each team features 8 players, 3 attackers, 4 defenders and 1 goalkeeper. The aim of the game is to score as many points as possible within the 5-minute period. How are points scored? Well, once the amphitheatre section that the players are standing in fills all the way to the top with water, you can begin to swim around and throw the ball between your teammates. The aim of the game is to throw the ball through one of the triangular goals at either end of the stadium that inflates once the entire arena is filled with water. If the game's all tied after that 5-minute period, we start to go into consecutive 5-minute periods of golden goal, meaning whichever team gets the next goal wins the game. If it's still all tied after 30 consecutive minutes of overtime action, we restart the game and make it 0-0. If I was a fan, I'd be praying for that every week. Imagine paying however much currency in Final Fantasy dollars for a 5-minute game that ends 1-0. Within Final Fantasy X, you can explore 2 different stadiums that have been built for competitive Blitzball. The first example is the Dreams in R-CADE stadium, which you find in ruins during the game as a result of the attack on the Dream World by Sin. In the climax of the game, the player and their party challenges Sin to a battle inside the Znarkard stadium. The second stadium, the Lucas Stadium, is where you play matches within Final Fantasy X. The structure is considered by NPCs to be a shining beacon of hope for the Final Fantasy world, underneath this dark shadow cast by Sin. Cheery. Everything you want in professional sports. Number 3. Coley. Within the fictionalised world of Bionicle, there exists the Toa, the long-legged heroes which defend the common people all across Metro and Matanui. The people protected by the Toa are the Minoran, which are your typical standard everyday individuals, much shorter-legged and not powerful godlike beings. Within Bionicle there are 6 different societies, each representing one of 6 different elemental forces. That includes fire, water, air, earth, stone and ice. Yes, before you get jumpy in the comments, stone and earth should be the same, as should water and ice. We'll move on, it's a game for kids. The sport of Coley was developed by 2 former Toa, the Toa of Earth and the Toa of Stone, as a way to settle disagreements between their 2 villages, and soon it spread into the national game of Matanui. Here's the basics. You can play with as many teams as you want, up to 6, one representing each of the 6 different nations. Each team has 2 different players, both equipped with staffs, think like lacrosse, one of which is a defender who also gets to carry a shield. You can have as many steel balls as you like, so long as the number of steel balls is less to the number of teams available, so that there's still competition over who has control of the balls. And you must defend your goal by hassling all the other teams using your staff or shield, only making contact with their staffs or shields. To hit your opponent brings disgrace upon your village. Genuinely part of the 11 rules. The 11th rule, if anyone attacks during a game, you're allowed to stop. Pretty handy. If you want to see Coley in action, check out the Bionicle movie The Mask of Light, or watch all 4 movies in the series, because I love them. Speaking of loving them, it might explain why I will defend lacrosse till my dying breath. I am also their target demo. Makes sense. Number 2, Blood Bowl. The stereotype is that Warhammer players don't really care about sport and vice versa. Well, the game of Blood Bowl is trying to change that narrative. Blood Bowl is a combination of Warhammer and American football. It originally started as a tabletop role-playing game back in 1986 and has received several re-releases and remasters since then, the most recent of which came in 2016, which was 22 years after the prior release. During gameplay, each player takes control of a team made up entirely of one race from the fictional Warhammer universe. This can include the likes of humans, halflings and lizardmen. Each turn allows for movement, blocking, blitzing, passing, handoffs and fouls. One concern I have: how does fouling work? Part of the game introduces weapons to the mix. Things like chainsaws, which you can use to cut people into pieces. If you can chainsaw somebody, what counts as a foul? In 2004, Chaos League was released for PC by developer Cyanide Studios, who were subsequently sued by Blood Bowl's creators Game Workshop due to similarities between their product. Despite this, and following an out-of-court settlement, Cyanide Studios became the licensees of the Blood Bowl franchise and altered their game so that it was an accurate representation of the original Blood Bowl name and game. Since then, they've produced a sequel series in 2015, and later this year comes Blood Bowl 3, Electric Boogaloo. Sadly, you can't play Blood Bowl in the park with your friends. Not because American football is unrealistic in and of itself, more just if you took a chainsaw to your friend's hands to stop them getting a touchdown, you wouldn't lose the game, you'd go to jail. And that's a different board game. Number 1, Pro Bending. One of the best aspects of The Legend of Korra is that we get to see how the world of Avatar heals following the events of Avatar: The Legend of Aang. The cultures and societies cultivated by the Water Tribe and the Earth Kingdoms are allowed to grow and sprawl to their heart's content now that the Fire Nation has been pushed back by the events of the previous series. All three cultures, Earth, Water and Fire, are able to flourish and grow outside their walled kingdoms. In a world without war, there was no longer a reason to combine bending with martial arts, which is where the Republic City steps in and develops pro bending. The sport has some very specific rules for each of the individual players, but I'm going to give you the basics right now. Each team consists of one of the three common types of benders, one Earth, one Water and one Fire. Each of these different bending styles and types has their own set of rules, depending on what they can and cannot do within the pro bending sport. The contest takes place on a platform suspended above a pool full of water. Each team pushes back and forth against each other, trying to take over as much of the surface as they can. The other way to get a win is to knock out all of your opponents, and by knockout we mean launch them into the water. At the end of the time limit, whoever has taken over the most of the platform or has the most knockouts by knocking people into the water wins the game. The game goes for 3 different rounds, and at the end you see who the winner is. To me, pro bending feels a little bit like a mix of mixed martial arts, kabaddi and sumo wrestling. On one hand, it's a contest between different martial arts styles from the 3 different kinds of bending, as well as the different tribes there and within. The kabaddi influence is moving back and forth across a single stage, trying to take points from one team to the other, while sumo wrestling is the element of the game where you're knocking people off of the platform. The best part: you can watch the sport throughout the early episodes of Avatar: The Legend of Korra. The sport of pro bending has 18 fictionalized teams, and now I'm going to tell you some of my favourite ones. The Ba Sing Se Badger Moles, the Black Quarry Porcupines, the Baoling Buzzard Wasps, the Capital City Cat Gators, the Ember Island Eelhounds, the Future Industries Fire Ferrets, the Golden Temple Tiger Dillo. That's been the R-CADE Glasgow top 5 fictional sports, but which have we missed and what would you like to see in the part 2 that may be coming later this year? I've been Sam from R-CADE Glasgow. You can catch me every week over on twitch.tv/R-CADE2, TWO. You can catch the rest of R-CADE on that throughout the week, and you can catch us on the main channel, twitch.tv/R-CADE Glasgow. You can support all the work we do on Patreon, and you can find us on all of our social media, Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at R-CADE Glasgow. We also put clips up on our TikTok account, so make sure you check it out there, or make sure you subscribe to this channel so you can see all of our best bits here, there and everywhere. Thank you for watching. I've been Sam. Enjoy sports. I'm off to play lacrosse for the first time. The Harbour Town Hog Monkeys, the Kolau Komodo Rhinos, the Laogai Lion Vultures, the Moche Mongoose Lizards, the Makapu Moose Lions, the Orchid Garden Ostrich Horses, the Pinnacle Palace Platypus Bears, the Red Sands Ravaroos, the Rhino Lions, the White Falls Wolf Bats and the Chow Yao Zebra Frogs.